All right, we're going to go through this video of how to connect Bubble with OpenAI with Pinecone to enable you to upload your own documents and then do question and answers based on those documents that you've uploaded. It's going to go through two different parts. One is the first part, which is uploading and storing your documents. And the second part is then how to ask questions based on your own documents and going through the querying process and then prompting process to an OpenAI completions API. So for the first video, we're just going to focus on the uploading and storing the documents. That's what we're going to go through right now. And basically it breaks down into these three different parts. One, it's creating a document, chunking it into smaller pieces, and then for each piece, embedding that piece into a vector. And that process to embed it to a vector basically creates a semantic meaning for that document chunk or that text that's been chunked into smaller pieces. And so from there, you then store it in Pinecone as a vector specifically. So all the text is going to live on the Bubble side in the database there. Only the vector representation of that text is going to live within Pinecone. We'll kind of walk through these different phases here. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to jump into the Bubble side first, get the database set up, and then we'll go ahead and connect some APIs in there, and then we'll actually go and build out the workflows from there. So let's quickly go into the Bubble editor. Let's actually go to data and first set up the two different tables that we're going to need for this. One is just a document table. We'll go ahead and create that. Within the document table, we're just going to use one field here, which is name, and that's going to be a text string. So let's go ahead and create that. And then the second part is the document chunk. And so basically we're going to take that long document that you're going to put in and then build it into smaller chunks. Specifically, we're going to break it into 100-word increments. But we'll go through that process a little bit later. So create that. And then there's just two fields here that we're going to get created. So one is we're going to connect it to the document that it's a part of so that we can connect there. And we're going to use then name the field document and then connect it to a document as a field type. And then the second part is just the text content of that text chunk, that chunk that we're going to break down. So that's a field type text. Go ahead and create that. It's all good. All right. So now we have the database set up and ready to go, and we'll go through this process. So when we go through, we're going to create a document in Bubble, and then we're going to chunk it into smaller pieces by 100 words, also in Bubble, and then we're going to store the text content of that chunk in Bubble as well. And then from there, we're going to send it off to OpenAI to do the text embedding to vectors, and then take those vector embeddings and then put that over up into Pinecone. But one step at a time. Let's go on to the next step. So we're going to go ahead and then get the OpenAI embedding API set up. So I'm going to go over to plugins. First of all, on the Bubble side, I am going to go here. We have got the API connector. If you don't have that plugin, I think it's pretty easy. Just go to add plugins. It's the first one, most popular plugin in Bubble. Go ahead and install that and say you're done. And then we're going to go ahead and get these APIs set up. So we'll start with the first one. We're going to call this OpenAI, and we're going to go ahead and get a curl command from OpenAI to go through this. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the vector embedding side here on the OpenAI documentation. So if I go to API reference, once I'm logged in, I'm in the developer tools area, and then go to embeddings, which is the part that we're looking at. We're then going to take this curl command here, or curl, and we're going to copy it. So basically it's just the authorization header, content type header, and then it's just an input text, and then the model we're going to use, which is this one. So I go back to the Bubble editor, and I'm going to then import another call from there, and then you'll see now we've got this set up. So a couple things that we want to make sure we go through in this process. One, I'm going to rename this from curl call to embeddings. I'm going to change it to use as action because we're going to trigger it from a workflow later on. And I'm going to make these two headers private, and we'll fill out this OpenAI key in a second. And then the last part here is to make the input a dynamic value so that we can input whatever we want there. So I'm just going to put text to embed. And we're going to uncheck private there so that it is a dynamic value and we can put in whatever we want. Now, finally, we need to get an OpenAI key, API key. And if you go over to the API reference or in your developer tool, if you go to your account and go to view API keys, got a couple here. I'm going to go ahead and create a new one for video today. Basically, just a description. I'm going to create this secret key, and then you'll get a chance to copy it. Once you copy it and you close this, you'll never be able to see it again. So I recommend storing in a safe place so that you can go and reference back. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste it somewhere else off screen, and then I'm going to press done here. And now if I go over to the bubble editor, I'm going to replace after bearer in this authorization side. I'm going to replace that OpenAI API key with this key here. And now we're good to go. So we can now initialize the call. Make sure everything's good. We got embeddings name, action. This is the URL for it. These now are marked private. This is the dynamic value here. And we're going to put in just text to embed. I specifically make it this way so that the quotation marks are here in the value, and then we'll go through that, how we add that in terms of the workflow versus like putting them in here in the body. Sure, people do it different ways. This is the way that I do it. So go through that. Go ahead and initialize the call. We'll see we're all good. We get back a list of data, which is only one object usually, and then an embedding list, which is 1,536 dimensions or numbers that are representing as the embedding that you're getting back for that text. Go ahead and press save, and we're good to go on that side. So now the embedding side is done. And if we go back here, now we got to get this API set up, this upsert to Pinecone API. And so I'll go back to the Pinecone side here, and you'll see that this is a, I kind of created a blank one. I deleted what I had here before. So this is a Pinecone index. This is a project. So first off, we'll create an index. And we're just going to say video is the name. Sweet. And the dimensions is an important part. So this is how many dimensions the vectors are. And so for OpenAI's embedding, it is 1,536 dimensions. So we're going to input that there. The second part is the metric, which is cosine. This is what it's using to determine the similarity of different vectors. And so the cosine similarity is a process in which it measures the cosine similarity between the different points to be able to determine if it's close or not. So we're going to leave it as cosine for now. For this point, we're just going to keep as a starter and create the index. So go ahead and create that. It's going to go through a process, initializing, and so forth. So once that's done, we can start using it. But in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and get some stuff started. So we want to go to the docs. So that's down here. It's going to open up a new window. And then we're going to actually go to the API reference up here and the vector operation. So there's a couple different operations. Mostly we're going to focus on the upsert, which is how to enter new information in there. And so we're going to go ahead and input different things in here. So let's see. First off, so it's basically you're going to be building a curl command. And so from here, you'll see you have some information here, but it's not completely filled out. And we basically fill it out by adding them in here on the left. And then we kind of build it out to that. So step one is we need a header. We need an API key. So if I go back to the Pinecone side and I go to API key, I'm going to go ahead. You can create a new one and just also call this video. Create key, and I'm going to use this API key for the purpose of this video. And then I will go here and insert that there. So now I'm going to have API key, and it's going to have the right code here, right authorization code here. Second is the base URL. So this is just the default one. If I go over to here and go to my index, I'll see that this is the URL for my instance here. So I'm going to need to take that and then I will insert it here. So now, now you'll see that now it inserts the right URL here. Cool. So now we're building out that curl command. Second of all, we're just going to go quickly through. We need to add some objects in here. I'm going to match the ID of the vector to the chunk ID. So we're going to just call this document chunk ID. The values are the embedding values, the vectors. I'm just going to create two as examples. It will be 1,536 in the end, but this just gives it a way so that it creates the space for it in the curl command, and we'll go back to that. Second, we're going to then add some metadata, and the one metadata that we're going to add is the document ID. So, for example, if I wanted to filter my results only based on one document or multiple documents that are selected, I can be able to do that by passing that information. So we're going to need that document ID to be passed over as part of this. So this is just some metadata that's coming along with it. And then finally is namespace that we're going to add in. I'm just going to call this a team name or team ID. Usually you would use this as a way to think of it like if you have multi-tenant usage and you only want to get results from one person or one group's space, you would do it that way and only select that. So it's only going to query the vectors in this namespace. You could also do it if it's just like a different usage for the same team and they want to say, all right, this is my knowledge base. And so it's, team one knowledge base, and everything when you search for is going to go to that knowledge base and so forth. So it's just another way to kind of like segment the data within Pinecone. But that's all we got. So I think we're all good on this side. So I'm going to go ahead and press this copy button here, and I will go back to the bubble editor, and we're going to go ahead and create another API. So I'll go here. We'll call this Pinecone. Helps if I can spell, helps. And then we're going to go import another curl from this. So just going to go ahead and do that. And you'll see some stuff came through properly, some stuff did not. Looks like the post did not come through properly. So we're actually going to go back to Pinecone, and it should be here. So yeah. It's going to be your instance URL /vectors/upsert is what you're going to need there. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. We're just going to call it upsert vectors. Again, this is going to be called from a workflow, so we want to make it an action. And we're going to go through here. So private, private, private on the headers. And then we are going to go through and add in some dynamic values here in the body. Actually, it looks like it also did not all come through. So I'm actually just going to, oops, there we go. Now it showed up. All right. So values are going to be the vectors. So I am going to backspace out of this, and you need those brackets there because it is an array that's being passed. And I'm just going to then put in embedding. I leave that in between there because how it comes back from the OpenAI and going through Bubble, you're just going to get a list of numbers, and so we want to insert it in there. Cool. I'm going to mark that private. Now document ID is going to be document ID. Document chunk ID is going to be document chunk ID, and then team ID is just going to be, we're just going to call this namespace for now. All right, let's uncheck private on all of these because we do want them to be used or available for us to add in different things. And I'm just going to say, we're just going to call it sample ID. We'll come back to that one. And actually, I need to put the quotation marks on either side. Sample ID, document ID. Namespace is sample space. And then embedding, we're going to need a long list of 1,536 numbers in order for this to initialize. And there's a place where we can get that. We can actually go back up to the initialize embeddings one. And if you actually go and I can reinitialize it. So if I reinitialize this call, you have a spot where it says show raw data. So if I click there, now I have a list of all these numbers. And so I can scroll all the way down to the bottom and copy that list. Go ahead and save it. It's the same thing. And I can then put that long list here. And now it's all those numbers. Oh. And I can then initialize the call. You can see that it upserted one value, which is great. And if I actually go over to Pinecone, I can go to index info, and you'll see sample space 1 vector was uploaded or upserted. So we're all good there. So now we have all the pieces in place, at least from an API standpoint and the setup. So we have the database set up. We've got the OpenAI embedding API set up. We got the Pinecone upsert API set up. So we're all ready to go and get into the bubble and just start building stuff. So let's go back to the editor. We are good to go on that side. Let's make sure we got that. I am going to collapse this. I'm just going to go ahead and delete this extra one that, you know, kind of comes through since we did it based on the curl command. And I'll do the same here. Cool. So we're good. So we have basically OpenAI, we have the embeddings, and we have the Pinecone, we have upsert vectors. So now if I go back to design side, we're going to do a couple different steps here. Cool. So I have this, which is add chunks, which is basically we're going to put in the name, and then we're going to add the text here. So we're just going to copy and paste the text here. We could do something where you basically uploaded a PDF and then you converted that to text. But for the purposes of this, we're just going to keep it clean, just text only. And so from there, we're just going to go ahead and I kind of already created this front end design just to make it simple, but fairly simple fields. This is an input, short input, this is a long input, and then a button. That's all we got here. So if I click on that, I am going to go ahead and start workflow. So first thing we're going to do is we need to create a new thing, which is a document. And then we're just going to add all fields, and the name is the input name of text. So value. Sweet. So now we've got that. And now what we need to do is we need to now chunk this into smaller pieces. The best way to do that is actually through a back-end workflow. So let's go ahead and go through that back-end workflow process. Step one is you do need a paid account with Bubble or on a free trial of account. So if you go to settings, you'll go to API here, and you're going to need to enable workflow API and backend workflows. And so that gives you that ability to do that. And now, if I go through, we're going to go ahead and build a backend workflow. Because in this instance, I need to then now kick off a backend workflow to kind of go through this process. And it's going to go through a circle of iterating through multiple times and chunking this document into smaller pieces. And we're for this example, we're going to use 100 words as the chunking size. So let's go through and create that really quickly. If I go to backend workflows, we're going to create a new one, new API workflow. We're going to call it chunk text. Don't need to expose it as a public API workflow. We're only going to call it internally. And then we're going to add some parameters. So one, we need the full text. We need all the text that's being provided, and that's a field type text. We are going to need the document that was created in that first step, and that's a type document. And then we're going to need a chunk size. So how large of a chunk is it going to be? And that's going to be a number. We need to know how many, and we're going to do it by words. So we need to know how many words should each chunk be. And then we're going to need a start index. And that's going to be also a number. So this is basically where do we start? And so the purpose of this is like at first we're going to start at the beginning, but the next time through we're going to start at, say if the chunk is 100, we're going to start at 100, or actually we're going to actually add in another parameter called overlap, chunk overlap. And what that means is that we're going to overlap each chunk by some number of words. And so that's also a number. So in this instance, say we go through step one, we chunk one step of 100 words. And then the next time we may start, instead of at index 101, we may start at index 95 or 96. And so we overlap those, the last 5 words of the first chunk with the first 5 words of the next chunk. And so it kind of overlaps and so forth. That's all you need. You need those inputs in here. And then we're going to go through and then create some things. Step one is to create a new chunk, basically. So we're going to create a new thing, and that's going to be a document chunk. And we are going to do 2 parts. One is the document, which is the document that we pass through at the beginning of this. So we know that is the document that's going to be attached to. And then the text chunk, and this is where we're going to go through a process. All right, so text chunk is going to be the full text that we provided, and it's going to be split by, and we're going to put just a space here. And so basically it's taking that full text and splitting it by every space that was provided in there. And so that in the end means that it's going to create a new list of every word, because the space represents every word, like the separation of every word. So in the end, we're going to split this into an array or a list of words for the whole document by adding that space. All right. So we got that space in there, and now we are going to take for items from the start index, so from the first part until the chunk size. So we're saying that we're going to start at some point and we're going to go until another point. So this array of list, and if it's 1,000 words or 2,000 words, we're going to start with words 1 or 0 and 100, and then the next time we're going to start at 95 if we do the overlap, and then go to 195 and so forth and so forth. It's going to continue to go through this process. So basically we've now selected a list of words that we want this chunk to represent. Now we got to take it and move it from a list back into text, a text string. So now we are going to basically take that and we're going to say format as text. And we select which item in each list, and it's just actually just going to be this text is going to be the item per list, because all it is text that we split. And then the delimiter, which is what separates them, we also now want it to be a space, so we're putting the space back in from there. Sweet. So now we've gotten basically the first chunk, which is it's split. It was first split, and we then selected the words from the start to the chunk size, and then we've now put it back into text, into a text string. We created that. So now we need to take this information and bring it over to OpenAI to do the embedding. So now we're going to go to plugins. We're going to do the OpenAI embedding, and the text that we are going to embed is the result of step 1, to create the document, its text content. We're also now going to say formatted as JSON safe. So what JSON safe does is 2 things. One, it escapes any special characters, which makes it gets sent properly through the internet. And then 2, it puts the quotation marks on either side of the text. And that's why we set it up that way in the API work connector, where we did not put the dynamic value within quotation marks. We are then doing it as part of this. So that's great. So now we're going to do that process, and we're going to get back some embeddings. And the next step is to do the Pinecone upsert vectors. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go to upsert vectors. This is that long list again. We don't want that one. What we're going to do is we're going to take the dynamic data, and we're going to say result of step 2's data, which is that first list, and we're going to say first item, because there's only one item, and then we're going to say embedding. So that's what's going to get sent over as the embedding. Second thing is we now need to connect Pinecone with what's in the Bubble database, so that we know when we get the results back of the embeddings, what text is that result to on the Bubble side. Since everything is residing on the Bubble side, we are going to connect it with IDs. So we're going to say document ID is document unique ID. Document chunk ID is going to be the result of step 1's unique ID. And then for the namespace, this is depending on how you want to implement it. If you want to implement it by user or team, you might put it there so that you group everything in that way from a maybe multi-tenant approach. If you want to do it based on a search for that specific user and create a whole nother table based on that, that's up to you. I am just going to, for the purposes of today, I'm just going to call this Bubble Search. And everything is going to reside under Bubble Search for my example. But this can be dynamic, whatever you may want to do. Cool. So now we're going to basically go through that process. We're going to upsert this text content with the information that links it back to Bubble into Pinecone. And then now the next step is the final step, which is we need to now call this again to go to the next chunk. So it's just going to do the first 100 words, but if we use 100 words as the input, but now it needs to go and get the next chunk, and next chunk, and next chunk, and continue to do that over and over again until it goes through the entire document. And so that's where we actually then schedule this to run again. And so we go here to custom events. We say schedule API workflow. We're going to call the same thing that we're in, chunk text, and we're going to say schedule it right now, current date and time. So it's going to go start right now. And so basically we're going to input, pass through the same values that we started with. So the full text is going to get passed through again. The document is going to get passed through again. The chunk size can get passed through again. So we don't want to change this midway through. We want the document chunk size, document chunk size, text to all stay the same through this whole process. The two parts that are going to change one part that's going to change the start. We'll go back to that in a second. Chunk overlap also going to stay the same through the process. So we're going to now start the start index will now be the start index that was originally passed to it. And we are going to say plus the chunk size minus the chunk overlap. Sweet. And the final thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that this doesn't run for infinity, to keep going and going and going. And that's, so basically we are going to go in only when, that's same thing. So chunk start index plus chunk size minus chunk overlap is less than, and then we're going to count the number of words in the full text. So full text split by, and we are going to again do the space separator. So now we're going to get that list, and all we need is the count now. And so we have the full text split by into words, and now we need to then count the number of words. So it's going to keep running until Keep going to call that until it finishes and goes past the total number of words, and then it'll stop. That's it. So, actually, we didn't do the last part, which is the most important part. That button doesn't do anything. So let's go ahead and fix that. Let's go add chunks. So we created a document, but we don't do anything else after that. So we need to go to custom events, schedule an API workflow. We're going to do the chunk text. We're going to schedule it for current date and time. Full text is going to be the value in that multi-input add full text here. It's value. The document is going to be result of step 1's document. Chunk size. For the purposes of this, we're just going to put in numbers. You can make this dynamic or let the user decide, but we're just going to say the chunk size is 100 words. The start index we're going to say is 0. And the chunk overlap we're going to say is 5. So now it'll go through that process where it will create the document, and then it'll kick off this workflow, which will then chunk the text and then send it over to Pinecone. So sweet. Now let's go back to add text document. We gotta refresh like we got to, and then we'll put that in state of the union. Add the full text in. Scroll to the bottom and click split and upload to vector store. Sweet. So it kicked off the process. Now if we go to this side, we refresh. We should start to see some things come through. All right, I think I figured out what was going on. Basically, things were not being passed to Pinecone properly as part of the backend workflow. So in addition to making sure that we're actually calling it, we need to also do something properly here, which is making sure that this unique ID also gets formatted as JSON safe, and this one as well. So basically, this was the Pinecone upsert vectors. They're text strings on the Pinecone side, so we need to make sure that they are text strings properly and in quotation marks on that side. So embedding goes through, these two go through as quotation marks, and then it should then go through all the process. So now, if I go here, update, and do state of the union, and then I go ahead and paste the whole state of the union, I can then split, and then it should go through the process of actually uploading to Pinecone. So now if I check on the Pinecone side, you'll see that now bubble search is starting to got its first one. It's going to go through this cycle. So it's going to do 1, it's going to do 2, it's going to do 3. I think this is around 70 different chunks total. So it's going to continue to count up. It takes a few minutes for it to go through the whole process and all get into Pinecone. But once it's done, you'll have about 70 vectors that are now in this bubble search namespace that we just created that now go in there. And then it's ready to go to do the querying side. So once they're all in, now we can go and build the querying side to ask a question. It'll query the database for the vectors that are similar to that question, and then it'll return them. And then it'll go through another process to send that information as context over to the OpenAI chat completions API to then ask the question and get an answer back from the context of the document that you originally uploaded. But we'll go through that in the next video, so go ahead and check it out.